In at number 5 we have Jim Morrison. Born James Douglas Morrison, he was a singer, songwriter and poet who served as the lead vocalist of the rock band The Doors. However, Morrison developed an alcohol dependency during the 60s, with him passing away unexpectedly at the age of 27 in Paris. As no autopsy was performed, the cause of his death remains unknown. He was ultimately laid to rest in the famous Père Lachaise cemetery. Over the years, his headstones were defaced or stolen until Morrison's own father placed a rather ordinary looking one on the site with an inscription in Greek, which reads, "Against his own demon." However, in 1997, journalist Brett Meisner was visiting the cemetery when he had this photo taken of him, standing in front of Jim Morrison's headstone. However, in the background of the picture, standing in the doorway of a crypt, you can clearly see a semi-transparent figure, arms held wide, which resembles the late singer. Many state that the pose is very reminiscent of a famous photo taken of Morrison. What do you guys think though? Ghost or trick of the light? Whatever you think, it's been enough to drive more tourists to the cemetery to attempt to catch a glimpse of the famous singer. In at number 4 we have Sweeney Todd. Now hear me out before we begin. Yes, I know that Sweeney Todd is said to hail from Victorian London, however this legend states that maybe he didn't, and maybe he walked the streets of France. First and foremost though, Sweeney Todd is a fictional character who appeared as the villain of the Victorian petty dreadful serial The String of Pearls. The tale became a staple of Victorian melodrama and London urban legend. A barber from Fleet Street, Sweeney Todd murders his customers with a straight razor and turns their bodies over to Mrs. Lovett, his partner in crime, who bakes their flesh into meat pies. However, could it be that the original Sweeney Todd was not from London but instead hailed from medieval Paris? Legend states that Paris had its very own demon barber during the 14th century, and was perhaps the first home to the cannibalistic pastries from the murderous barber. During this time, the Rue de Marmousets was known far and wide for its succulent French delicacies, especially for those made by a butcher next door to a barbershop on the corner. The pies and pastries were said to be so tasty that even King Charles VI was said to have been a fan. From 1384 to 1387, the butcher was said to have been in cahoots with his neighbouring barber, with it being said that the pastries were so scrumptious thanks to the young flesh of the victims of the demon barber. The partnership was said to have thrived for 3 years and would have continued if their gory deeds weren't discovered. It was said that an abandoned dog was what gave them away, who was barking outside the door of the barber's. The police conducted a search and discovered heaps of humans' bones and flesh in the shed underbelly of the two shops. For their crimes, the barber and the butcher were burned alive, along with their shops, in order to exorcise the area from their evil.
Next up at number 3, the Curse of Andvari's Ring. And for this one we're going to dip a little into Norse mythology, because let's face it, the history of the Scandinavian people was shaped by these skaldic tales that they formed their culture upon. And what if I also told you that the Curse of Andvari's Ring is also one of the many inspirations of none other than J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings? Yeah, Curse Ring, Lord of the Rings. Alright, okay, maybe you saw that one coming. But still, in the original legend, one that is scarcely told but is integral to the Volsunga saga, the story focuses on the eponymous ring Andvaranut, or Andvari's gift, a fabled item that had the ability to make gold. Its creator, Andvari, which is Old Norse for careful one, was a dwarf that lived beneath a waterfall who had the primal power to transform himself into a fish at will. Using the power of the ring, Andvari stockpiled great wealth, but it drew the jealousy of the trickster god himself, Loki. You see, being the resourceful type that he was, Loki used a charm net to capture Andvari whilst he was transformed in a fish, and on condition of letting him go, he demanded the ring and his hoard of gold with it. You see, whilst Andvari reluctantly agreed, he also cursed the ring so that misfortune and peril would befall whosoever possessed it. And that's where the real bulk of this tale begins, because as so far as misfortune goes in Norse mythology, Andvari's ring is chasing the heels of Ragnarok in terms of individuals affected. First, Loki passed on the cursed ring to Hreimdar, king of the dwarves, for accidentally killing his son when he was transformed into an otter. Yeah, dwarves and transforming into animals is a pretty key motif here. Hreimdar was quickly hit by misfortune though when his own son, Fafnir, killed him and stole the ring, where he fled to the mountains, transformed into a fiery and fearsome dragon to protect his hoard of gold. Where have we heard that one before? Fafnir didn't last long though, because soon enough the great hero Sigurd hunted down and killed Fafnir the dragon, taking his ring with him, who he gave to his beloved Brunhilda, the shield maiden, and Valkyrie, where the both of them spent years befallen with tragedy after tragedy. Eventually, Queen Grimhild of the dwarves tricked the couple into marrying into her own family, therefore bringing the curse of the ring full circle. Yeah, exactly. Rock and pool is nice and cool, our only wish to catch a fish. makes a bit more sense now, right? Coming in at number 2, Lindisfarne. Alright, okay, less mythology now and more actual historic atrocity. Lindisfarne in many ways is perhaps the most important date on the Viking calendar. In more ways than one, it was the birth of the Viking Age. It was the precursor to the many times that these Danish, Norwegian and Swedish warriors would step foot on the shores of Britain, or, well, not quite Britain just yet. Not the mainland anyway. You see, the holy island of Lindisfarne is a tidal island just off of the northeast coast of England in Northumberland. Here it was the site of an incredibly important church in pagan Christianity. It was a peaceful and quiet place dedicated to the production of scripture by its humble monastery. In the year 793 it was said that several months before, foreboding omens came over the land of Northumbria. Whirlwinds far at sea, lightning cracking from beyond the waves, and fiery dragons seen flying in the sky. These signs were followed by a great famine, and then on the 8th of June the Vikings emerged from the mist. As a Northumbrian scholar of Charlemagne's court wrote, "Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the streets." You see, the English didn't know what had hit them. The Vikings had perfected the art of shipbuilding and navigation, and they had sailed to a land that they suspected would be filled with riches and resources ripe for the picking. And when they first emerged at Lindisfarne, where the only opposition was holy men in robes, it was like a hot knife through butter. The massacre at Lindisfarne was unprecedented, and in many ways it had only served to further the Vikings' bloody reputation for centuries to come. It sent shockwaves through the rest of Europe, but as history teaches us, that wasn't the last of it. The slaughter at Lindisfarne ushered in a newfound frequency of Viking raids across the coast, as well as in Ireland and France, carving out a brand new period in Britain's bloody history. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Blood Eagle. Alright, talking of bloody history, our final entry on this list has to be perhaps the most notorious claim in Viking history. Throughout the many sagas of the Viking Age, one term struck more fear into the hearts of those that opposed the Danelaw than anything else. Now, it's also important to note that the so-called Blood Eagle, much like with many things of Norse legend, is possibly as much a fact as it is in fiction. In fact, many historians regard this particular torture method as being so bloodthirsty and grisly that it probably never even happened, but was instead used as a cultural myth to strike fear into the hearts of the Vikings' enemies. I mean, that's also not to say that there are several historical accounts, because there are, but yeah, just take this one with a pinch of salt. As the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok explains, Jarl Ynar went to Halfdan and carved Blood Eagle on his back. He thrust a sword into his trunk by the backbone and cut all the ribs away, from the backbone down to the loins, and drew the lungs out there. Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement. You see, one of the earliest accounts of the use of the Blood Eagle is attributed to the death of Ragnar Lothbrok himself. Back in 865, King Jarl, who was the then king of Northumbria, had finally captured the legendary Viking leader Ragnar Lothbrok and sentenced him to death by throwing him into a pit of deadly snakes. And before anyone says that the United Kingdom doesn't have any deadly snakes, yes we do. It's the adder, and they're incredibly poisonous. Anyway, in revenge for his death, the sons of Ragnar, led by Ivar the Boneless, led a Viking invasion a year or so later with King Jarl in their sights. And once they finally found him following the Battle of York in 867, Viking legend maintains that Jarl was tortured to death by each of Ragnar's sons by method of the Blood Eagle, where he was kept alive during the grisly and bloodthirsty punishment. You see, whether true or not, Jarl was not the only one to have allegedly succumbed to the Blood Eagle, as many other figures throughout the sagas met the same grim fate. Either it was the most painful and vile punishment imaginable, or it was the scariest story ever told in ancient Nordic history.
Coming in at 5, Princess Brunhild at Rostrap. This legend goes that years ago there ruled a king in Bohemia whose castle was atop a lofted mountain where thunder and eagles found a home. Now this king had a daughter, Princess Brunhild, whose beauty was famous far and wide. Rulers and their sons sought the hand of the maiden, and among the suitors came the son of the king of Hars, who won her heart. He returned to his father to announce his betrothal and to make arrangement for the nuptials. However, someone had other plans. A new suitor arrived for Brunhilde's hand, a terrible giant who inhabited North Europe, terrifying all those who saw him. He brought with him costly gifts of gold, amber and precious stones, and after a few days of consideration the king promised the giant his daughter. Now the giant had 2 steeds, one white as snow and the other black as night, both giant, with the earth trembling beneath them as they ran. So one day Brunhilde begged to ride with the giant. She mounted the white steed and raced to be with her true true love has. The black steed was in quick pursuit behind her. At the very top of the treacherous Rostrap, Brunhild reached the cliff edge. However, her brave white stallion had other ideas and jumped right across the mountain and reached the other side. The giant, however, did not and ultimately plunged to his death. Atop the Rostrap hill in the Haas mountain range, you will find the hoof shapes imprinted into the rock on the edge of the cliff, marking the path the great white steed took when freeing the trapped princess. Coming in at 4, the Wachsman Mountain. The Wachsman is a mountain in the Bavarian Alps and is the 3rd highest in Germany, and the highest mountain located entirely on German territory. Now, for a mountain so famous throughout the country, you can imagine there would be a handful of legends associated with it. And that there are. One legend goes that in the deepest corners of southern Bavaria, a tyrannical king named Wachsman reigned the land, and enjoyed slavery and hunting local peasants. On one particular day, after a series of bloody killings, a curse was cast upon him and his family, which resulted in them all turning to stone. Now it is said that they are still entombed within the range of 7 mountains, near the town of Berchtesgaden. Would you climb this peak to discover if the legend is true? If so, I'll be right there with you. Coming in at number 3, the Catacombs. The Catacombs of Paris are underground ossuaries which hold the remains of more than 6 million people in a small part of a tunnel network built to consolidate Paris' ancient stone quarries. Now, it was largely forgotten until it became a novelty place for concerts and various other private events in the early 19th century, as well as a hotspot for urban explorers. Now, as you would expect, there are a ton of legends surrounding this creepy burial site, so I'll be listing off a handful. Let's start with the ghost of Philbert Espard. During the French Revolution, Philbert was a doorman at the Val de Grace Hotel. During a mission to fetch a liqueur from a cellar, Philbert wound up in the Paris catacombs instead, walking around in the darkness alone with just a single candle. He became lost and confused. His body was not found until 11 years later when a group of cataphiles uncovered it. His body is now buried in the catacombs in the exact spot that he was found. Legend now states that on each November 3rd, Philbert's ghost haunts the labyrinth of the catacombs. However, the most disturbing story hails from the 1990s when a group of cataphiles were walking through the catacombs and discovered a video camera on the ground. To their surprise, the camera held footage on it. While watching the footage, it became apparent that the man filming was lost and had no idea how to escape the winding tunnels. The video then ends abruptly with the man dropping the camera on the ground and running off into the unknown. He was never discovered. However, it was this legend that many believe As Above, So Below, the movie, was based off of. Coming in at number 2, we have the Phantom of the Opera. We're all familiar with the 1986 musical based on the book by Gaston Leroux, with music by Andrew Lloyd Webber. Its central plot revolves around a beautiful soprano, Christine Daae, who becomes the obsession of a mysterious, disfigured musical genius living in the subterranean labyrinth beneath the Paris Opera House. But did you know this story is actually based on legend, with many Parisians being all too familiar with the story of the Phantom and the mysterious box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House. This legend began at the Music Conservatory on Rue Les Pelletiers, where it is said that a young pianist and a young ballerina fell in love. Planning to be wed, the pianist composed a piece of music to symbolize their love that was intended to be played at their wedding. However, that never happened because on October 28, 1873, a fire destroyed the conservatory and killed many, including the ballerina. The pianist survived but was forever scarred by the fires, particularly on his face. He abandoned the world and took refuge in the underground passage of the Garnier Opera House in order to escape the dreadful people who considered him a monster or a demon. He stayed there for the rest of his life, devoting himself to his music. Now, the pianist was never disturbed, but rumors quickly began to spiral, creating the legend of the Phantom of the Opera. The first rumors came from the opera house staff, such as stagehands and dancers. And it is also purported that box number 5 at the Garnier Opera House is said to be haunted by the mysterious Phantom and should always be left vacant for him. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Notre Dame and the Devil's Door. Notre Dame is one of the most infamous places in French history, with it being a medieval Catholic cathedral that was consecrated to the Virgin Mary and is considered to be one of the finest examples of French Gothic architecture. However, popular interest in the cathedral blossomed after the publication of Victor Hugo's novel The Hunchback of Notre Dame back in 1831. The cathedral is holy ground, but saying that how many tourists from around the world have been ushered in by Satan himself. Some history first though. When it comes to the construction of buildings such as this one, construction always starts at the back of the building with the entrances added last. So when it came time to add the famous door to the cathedral, a man by the name of Mr. Biscornet Bisconet, a young metalsmith, convinced the church to hire him. The job lasted months, with Bisconet slaving away in his workshop. However, when he finally finished, it was of course a masterpiece and blew the minds of Parisians. However, were the doors perhaps too good to be true? This all took place during the 1300s, when magic was believed and myths spread fast. So when people saw the door for the first time, they believed that Bisconet couldn't possibly have crafted it himself, and that instead he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for the masterpiece. Stories quickly began to emerge of people claiming to have visited Bisconet during the creation, and found him unconscious on the floor with the project mysteriously completed. The rumors began to spread, with priests adding fuel to the fire by claiming that the door's locks refused to work until they were sprinkled with holy water. To top things off, not long after this, the artist died, with many speculating that in order to fulfill the contract, the devil had to claim Bisconet's soul.
Number 5 on this list is the Falling Boy. This is a sad legend that's probably true. The Black Church is located in the Romanian city of Brasov and is a beautiful old Gothic church. It almost never made it to 2022 though, because several hundred years ago it had a horrible fire. The church did manage to survive and had a bunch of renovations done on it to spruce it up. It's around this period of time that people think the Falling Boy statue was erected. On one single pillar of the exterior of the church, there's a statue of a boy who looks to be falling over. Either that or he's searching for something on the ground. It's difficult to say for sure. Either way, no one has any idea why this statue is here, and 3 legends have come out explaining it. Arena Webb writes, some say that he was the son of a priest and that he was naughty. As a punishment, his father sent him in the church's attic. But then the Great Fire started, and so the boy got trapped in there. The statue was built depicting him trying to escape the flames. Another legend, and a more popular one, is that the boy was helping with the construction of the church. At one point, his boss told him to check if the wall is straight. He leaned over the walls and he fell. His boss felt guilty and ordered a statue. Others, though, say it was murder. They say that this boy was so good working at the construction of the church that a fellow worker got envious. He sent the boy to check the walls and he pushed him. The boy died, but the man couldn't live with the guilt, so he confessed shortly after. The other builders decided to make the statue in the boy's memory. So those are the 3 legends about the boy, and sadly all of them result in the boy's death. Now it's thought that his spirit still lingers here at this church, and if you're lucky, you may even be able to spot him. Comment down below what you guys think about this legend and which of the 3 stories you believe the most. Curious to know what you guys got. Number 4 on this list is the Pied Piper. You've most likely heard the name and probably the story of the Pied Piper before. If you haven't, then let me read off a great passage from Andre Diamond describing the tale. The Pied Piper legend originated in Hamelin, Germany during the Middle Ages. As the story goes, the town was struggling with a rat infestation problem and was desperate for relief. A mysterious man in pied clothing approached the mayor and promised he could rid the city of its problem in return for payment of 1,000 guilders. The mayor agreed, and the man played a magical pipe to lure all the city's rats to a nearby body of water where they drowned. When the piper returned for his reward, the mayor refused. As if visualizing a rat infestation was not traumatizing enough, the story then takes another sinister turn. Furious that he had been cheated, the piper soon returned to the town of Hamelin on St. John's and Paul's Day. As the grown members of the town attend church, the piper once again played his magical pipe through the streets, this time luring the town's 130 children from their homes. Depending on the version of the story, he either led them to the lake or into a cave, and none were ever seen again. Most versions agree there were a few children left behind. One was crippled and he could not keep up, one was deaf so he could not hear the music, and one was blind and could not see where the other children were going. When church let out, the survivors told the townspeople what had happened, and the rest is history. Now you're probably thinking, okay Nick, well what the hell does this have to do with Romania? Well, there's another version of this legend that says this man took the into Vasis Cave and then after a time slowly let them out. Vasis Cave is in Transylvania, and it's believed by the locals that this Pied Piper still lives there. They also think that this is the true version of the legend because there's a very large population of German-speaking Saxons in that area. These people are thought to be the descendants of the children who were taken so many years ago. Even to this day though, everyone still fears Vasis Cave and still fears the Piper.
Coming in at 3, the Changeling. A changeling is a creature found in folklore throughout Europe, specifically Germany, and is believed to be a fairy child that had been left in place of a human child stolen by the fairies. It's a common theme stemming all the way back to medieval literature and reflects concern over infants thought to be afflicted with diseases or disorders. So this specific legend goes that once upon a time, at Hesloch near Odenheim, a servant and a cook of a clergyman were married and living together. However, their newborn baby would not grow or gain weight. The mother was told to visit Neuhausen and give her baby water from the Syriac spring, with many believing that a visit to the spring would either restore a child back to health or would kill it within 9 days. En route to the spring, the child became heavy and monstrous in her arms, which resulted in a passing traveller yelling to the wife that she had the devil on her back. I quote, "Your child is at home in a new cradle behind the chest in the side room. Throw this monster into the brook." The mother cried but did as she was told. She threw the creature into the brook and a great howl bellowed from beneath the bridge. She fled home where she found her baby, healthy and laughing in its brand new cradle. Coming in at 2, the Childrens Crusade. According to history, the Childrens Crusade was a failed crusade by European Christians to regain the Holy Land from the Muslims, said to have taken place in 1212. Now the story has become blurred over the years from factual to more mythical, with some versions including the visions by a French boy and a German boy, an intention to peacefully convert Muslims in the Holy Land to Christianity, with bands of children marching to Italy, and some being sold into slavery. Yeah, it's rough. In this specific German legend though, the story tells of a misguided German boy who was visited by Jesus, who told him to go forth and convert Muslims. So following the orders of Christ, he gathered a sizable group, mostly children, and led them towards the Mediterranean, where they took boats east. Now during their journey, one boat crashed, killing everyone on board. The others, however, arrived in Tunisia, where the children were sold into slavery, and in turn, none of them made it to their destination. Sad. I would have rather been on the boat. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Werewolf of Morbach. This legend goes that the Rhineland town of Wittlich is the last place in Germany where a werewolf had been killed. Thomas Johannes Baptist Schweister, what a name that is, was a supposed deserter from Napoleon's army and fled to his homeland in France. While passing through Wittlich, him and his hungry soldiers who fled with him located a farmhouse which they pillaged. However, in the process they were discovered by a farmer who they promptly killed along with his sons. The farmer's wife witnessed the deed and cursed Thomas, screaming, "From now on at each full moon you will change into a rabid wolf." So what did Thomas do? He crushed her skull. Of course. Anyway, as time went on, the curse began to take effect and Thomas's personality changed. He began to rob, rape and pillage until he eventually fled to the sanctuary of the deep forest, where he took on his wolf form. He began to slaughter livestock and animals in his new form before a group of villagers discovered him, killed him near the village of Morbach, and buried him. They lit a candle that would burn continually. As long as the candle is lit, the werewolf could never return. In at 5, the Collector. The Collector is a really catch-all legend for creepy hermetic neighbours that might be doing something strange in their basements. However, the most common legend is that of the neighbour who collects human body parts and proudly displays them in mason jars around their home. However, this legend has some real-world roots, unlike the rest of our list. Back in 2011, Russian police arrested a man described by the media as a cemetery collector for digging up 29 corpses and dressing the remains in female clothing to display around his home. This is an absolutely horrifying legend that became even more sickening after this event came to large. You may never know who your neighbour is or what they're doing after hours. Just don't go to their basement if they invite you inside. In at 4, the Black Bird of Chernobyl. Now this legend garnered traction on the internet, of course, and focuses on a creature that is allegedly seen in Ukraine around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, specifically in the weeks leading up to the disaster on April 26, 1986. Now its description is very similar to that of the Mothman and is humanoid in appearance and was presumed to have been black or dark grey in colour. It was also claimed by witnesses that it possessed wings and glowing red eyes. The black bird was spotted by several workers before they passed away, with some theorising that the bird was serving as an omen of doom, warning the workers of the lethal radiation within the plant. Not only that, some of the survivors shortly before the nuclear meltdown began to experience weird goings on, including nightmares, threatening phone calls, and encounters with the winged beast. Following the disaster, and as the Soviet helicopters arrived, circling the smoldering plant, dropping clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals on top of the flame, some of the workers claimed to have witnessed a 20-foot bird gliding through the undulating tentacles of irradiated smoke, which was spewing from the reactor. Frightening.
Number 3 on this list is the Sacrificial Lakes. Most of the time when somebody enters a body of water, they're worried about becoming food to the fish that live in the said. Most of the time when someone enters a body of water, they're worried about becoming food to the fish that live in said body of water. What they usually aren't as concerned with is becoming food to the actual water itself. That's exactly what some people in Romania believe in regards to some of their bigger lakes though. Lake Vinderel, for instance, is known to some locals as a lake which will actually swallow people up. Even the most skilled swimmers who go here will drown and never be heard from again. Most of the time these bodies are never found, but there's a legend that says a piece of bloody flesh floats on top of the water at all times. Lake Vinderel is one of the most famous, but it isn't the only lake in Romania that has some dark lore around it. One lake literally swallowed up an entire town when a slope collapsed and forced the homes along with a church inside the water. People around that area often hear the ringing of church bells as they pass by the lake, thinking that the spirits of those who died in this tragedy still haunt the area. Because of all this death in these Romanian lakes, it's now believed that sacrifices must be made to keep the water at bay. Yep, that's right guys, what better way to stop people from dying in the lakes than to have people specifically die from the lakes? That's the train of thought, and it's most prevalent in the Maramureș region of Romania amongst the elderly folk who live there. They think that the only way to calm the dark spirits who clearly inhabit these waters is to occasionally offer a human sacrifice. Now I'm gonna be honest, I wasn't able to find exact details on who has been sacrificed or when, but I imagine that this has taken place at least once in Romania's history if there's an entire legend around it. I also find it kind of interesting that the Romanians don't have a particular demon or creature in mind who could be behind this. As of right now, it's just thought that there's a dangerous entity in the lake water and that sacrificing a human should relax that entity at least for a little while. Either way, if you're going to go swimming in Romania, then stay away from the lakes. Number 2 on this list is the World War II ghosts. There's a town called Owlman of Manon, and in that town there's a very specific mansion with some very interesting lore surrounding it. That mansion is called the Teleki Mansion. This mansion is really interesting because it didn't actually see much fighting at all, but is currently haunted with ghosts from World War II. The ghosts of these World War II soldiers who haunt this place sadly caused their tragic fate themselves. One evening, the soldiers went into the mansion and decided to enjoy a little bit too much wine. The mansion had cellars full of nice quality bottles, and the soldiers definitely overindulged. In fact, they got so hammered that they decided to start firing off their guns in the basement before passing out. They passed out in the cellar, and it's said that from the guns that they shot off, the wine started filling up the room. They were far too gone to notice and actually drowned in said wine. Now these soldiers haunt the mansion and locals see them regularly. In fact, some blurry photos were taken back in 2011 of these ghosts in the place. Dying is obviously worst case scenario and never what anyone wants, but I guess the one thing that you can say for these guys is that they probably died at least happy. Number 1 on this list is the nymphs of Thevina Cave. Deep in the mountains of Transylvania, through a long road of rivers and beautiful scenery, sits a forgotten cave called the Thevina Cave. This cave is full of crazy stuff from the past and has been a really important find for archaeologists studying Romanian history. Tombs, treasures, skeletal remains, and most important, potential evidence of nymphs are all found in this mysterious cavern. In case you aren't familiar with what a nymph is, then Britannica tells us that they were usually associated with fertile, growing things such as trees or with water. They were not immortal but were extremely long-lived and were on the whole kindly disposed toward men. These were women in Greek mythology who were considered divinities. It's believed that this cave may have once been the home to some of them. The treasure that's been found here, some of the inscriptions that are on the wall, the overall environment outside the cave, all of it fits the bill when it comes to a nymph. At the very least, if a nymph or a group of nymphs hadn't have lived here, then people definitely think this would have been a site of worship for them. Animal carcasses were found here as well, and it's believed that they would have been used for some sacrificial rituals to such higher beings. Now this cave is researched extensively, and locals think that it might possess some mysterious powers. Also, that the rivers that run around this area are rich with minerals and other healing properties. I suppose this urban legend isn't super scary, but honestly kinda cool. Then again, nymphs have been known to be dangerous in the past, so if there was one lurking around this cave still, you wouldn't want to get on its bad side.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Big Grey Man. Known as the Big Grey Man of Ben Macdhu in Scottish folklore, this creature is said to haunt the summit of Ben Macdhu. Although there have been many sightings of the Big Grey Man, few have actually seen the creature with their eyes. Rather bizarrely, a couple of witnesses claim the creature wears a top hat, and whenever he appears, the sound of loud crunching footsteps echo across the mountains. Some hear singing, others ghostly laughter. Although there have been many sightings of the Big Grey Man, few have actually seen the creature with their eyes. This is due to the fact that the Grey Man is apparently more often felt than physically seen. Climbers experience uncontrolled terror, deep despair, and huge negative energy. Not surprisingly, many walkers feel an overwhelming desire to run away. Some have felt themselves pursued by echoing footsteps, others are hypnotically drawn to the edge of cliffs. Those people who actually have witnessed the creature describe it to be very thin and over 10 feet tall, with dark skin, hair, long arms, and broad shoulders. That being said, most often the creature remains unseen in the God of the Mountains. In 1925, Collie Norman was the first recorded witness of the creature, as he recalls a terrifying experience in the face of Big Grey Man. Collie was a hiking enthusiast, professor, and member of the Royal Geographical Society. He reported that as he was returning to the summit, he was surrounded by mist and began to hear noises of footsteps that were not his. The footsteps sounded as if someone was chasing him, with steps 3 or 4 times the length of his own. Collie became extremely frightened and rushed down the hike to get away from the creature that was supposedly following him. After Collie came out with this story, many other hikers shared similar stories of their own encounters with the Big Grey Man, reporting that they as well heard footsteps following them and felt uneasy and a negative energy in the area. While in 1945, a worker, Peter Densham, reported that he heard strange noises while the mist began closing in on his location, and with the added feeling of pressure around his neck. The worker fled the scene before anything else could escalate. Even though there have been only a few eyewitnesses, it's safe to say that wherever the Grey Man ventures, he is accompanied by a sense of irrational panic and dread. In at number 4, we have the Black Shook. Considered the most common urban legend in Britain, we have Black Shook. You can find the Black Shook in the counties of East Anglia, lurking in the graveyards, crossroads, or forests. The Black Shook is described as a large black dog with flaming red eyes. On some accounts, the Black Shook appears to have one eye in the middle of its forehead. The dog varies in size, though has been compared to a large dog to the size of a horse. However, it is generally described as about the size of a mastiff, with shaggy black fur and glowing red eyes. These beasts were known to suddenly appear without warning, then disappear as quickly as they arrived. One of the most notable reports of Black Shook is his appearance at the churches of Bungay and Blythburgh in Suffolk. On August 4th, 1577 at Blythburgh, Black Shook is said to have burst in through the church doors. He ran up the aisle past a large congregation, attacking a man and a boy and causing the church steeple to collapse through the roof. As the dog left, the beast left scorch marks on the north door, which can be seen at the church to this day. The Black Shook has a mixed reputation. In the earlier days of the legend, the Shook was known as a negative omen. In its first encounters, it was even said to have eliminated people directly. Today, the Shook's reputation has received an unlikely makeover. Some modern witnesses, mostly women, have reported that the Shook acted as a protector and guided them home when they were lost at night. Sometimes referred to as an omen of death, sometimes a more companionable animal, but you might not want to take those chances if you are faced in front of the terrifying beast. In at 3, the curse of the Ivan Vasily. Ivan Vasily is perhaps one of the most terrifying and shocking urban legends that is actually true and exists in the Russian history books. Now, the ship was built in 1897 as a transport freight across the Baltic Sea to the Gulf of Finland and driven by a single triple expansion steam engine. This ship was reliable, stable, and nothing unusual happened for the first 5 years it was on the sea. Then, one night changed everything. In 1903, the Russian government was preparing for war with Japan, so the freighter's role changed drastically overnight and the ship was ordered to carry cargo of war materials to Russian warships. The ship was first sent to the west coast of Africa to get coal, and after they stocked up, the crew noticed a change on the ship. Something wasn't quite right. right. However, they continued and set sail across the Indian Ocean. Now, the uneasiness that the crew was feeling was as if there was an invisible entity on the ship, as if someone was watching them, and the atmosphere just felt wrong or negative. The crew were visibly scared. Then one night a man on the ship saw an apparition, a ghostly figure that was glowing with an odd mist, walking across the deck before disappearing behind a lifeboat. Of course, the sightings only made things worse for the crew, who were now on high alert. Just a few nights later, another crew member let out a terrifying scream, sending everyone into a panic. Then men went crazy and began to fight each other until one of them jumped into the ocean to his death. The crew had absolutely no idea what they were doing. A couple nights later, the crew just out of nowhere started to fight yet again, and another man jumped overboard to his death. The crew felt like they were being possessed by an unseen force. Once the ship finally docked, most of the crew abandoned the ship, and new crew were hired to handle the cargo. While out on the seas, the same thing began to happen, resulting in 2 people dying on the journey, including the captain, who flung himself overboard. This went on for some time until the crew finally realized the only way to deal with it was to burn the ship down. The sailors gathered in tugboats and watched on as the ship went down in flames. Coming in at number 2, the Well to Hell. The Well to Hell is a legend about a putative borehole in Russia which was reportedly drilled so deep that it broke through to hell itself. The legend holds that a team of Russian engineers in an unnamed place in Siberia had drilled a hole that was 14.4 kilometers deep before breaking through to a cavity. The researchers were of course intrigued by the discovery and lowered an extremely heat-tolerant microphone into the well. The temperature was reportedly 1832 Fahrenheit, and the chamber was filled with flames. Screams began to be picked up on the microphone, tormented screams that were begging for help. However, the recording was later found to be looped together from various sound effects. Now, in reality, the Soviet Union had drilled a hole more than 12 kilometers deep in the Kola super deep borehole, located not in Siberia but on the Kola Peninsula. Upon reaching the depths of 12,262 meters in 1989, interesting geological anomalies were found, but nothing supernatural and definitely not the Well to Hell. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Russian sleep experiment. This is perhaps one of the greatest urban legends of not just Russia but of all time. It's simply known as the Russian sleep experiment, and according to the legend, researchers in the 1940s took 5 prison inmates and locked them in an airtight chamber with a special gas to keep them awake. This was so they could see the effects of prolonged sleep deprivation and promised the subjects their freedom if they could go 30 days without sleep. The results were of course absolutely horrific. On the 5th day, paranoia began to set in and the prisoners stopped talking to each other. On the 9th day, a few of them began screaming relentlessly while others tore apart the books they were given, smeared them with feces and blocked off the one-way mirror so they couldn't be seen. Then, out of nowhere, the screaming stopped. 3 days went by without sound from inside the chamber. The researchers tried to address them via the intercom, stating that they were coming in and for the prisoners to lie flat on the floor. Then one of the voices answered, "We no longer want to be freed." After 15 days, the researchers finally opened the door, and the sight was apparently horrific. One of the prisoners was dead and completely torn to shreds, with chunks of him stuffed into the floor drain. The other 4 prisoners had mutilated themselves to the brink of death and were terrified at the thought of going to sleep and begged to stay inside the chamber. They were forcibly removed, and when surgeons tried to fix the damage they had inflicted on themselves, they resisted so strongly that they couldn't be sedated. They laughed as they were sewn back together, fully awake and aware. Eventually, after enough demanding, they were returned back to the chamber, after the head researcher told his team to lock them back in. However, one member of the team resisted, shot the head researcher and then shot one of the 2 remaining prisoners. Before killing the last prisoner, he asked just one thing: "What are you?" The prisoner responded, "Have you forgotten so easily? We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." After this, the researcher shot the prisoner in the heart.
Number 5 on this list is the Basilisk. The Basilisk is a beast in Italian folklore that is said to annoy the living hell out of the villagers that's nearby. Bestiarium says, in the Val Carmonica, a valley in the central Italian Alps region, there is a local celebration which is connected to a legend about a mythical monster. This monster is the Basilisk, a creature with a huge head and large mouth, adorned with 2 tiny horns and 2 brightly glowing eyes. According to the local legend, the terrible Basilisk lived in the woods in Andrista, a small village. Actually, terrible is an overstatement. It did little harm, but it did constantly annoy the locals. As punishment, the beast was captured as the locals used a beautiful girl as bait to trap and capture the lusty beast. It was fought by a hunchbacked folk hero. So they hold a festival for the demon thing every year. There's a parade and they get a costume for it made from goat skin. The whole village participates in it and it's a whole big affair that's going on. However, there are a few select elders who don't participate. Whilst everyone is out and about having fun, drinking, and making merry, this select group of elders is inside being very careful with what they do. Apparently, this group was around when this beast first came to being. They saw it firsthand, and they don't agree with the way that people are treating it. In their opinion, the legend has been thoroughly exaggerated, and this creature isn't as kind as everyone wants to believe. They are under the impression that constantly doing this year in and year out is going to anger the creature, and one year it will finally unleash its wrath upon the village. Now, no one knows if this is true or not, or if it's just a bunch of people being really paranoid. However, I would tend to believe the people who claim to have seen this thing firsthand, rather than those who are just looking for an excuse to get drunk. Number 4 on this list is Stryzga. This is a demon very similar to a vampire that can be found in parts of Italy. Wikipedia says a Stryzga is a usually female demon somewhat similar to vampires in Slavic and especially Polish folklore. People who were born with 2 hearts and 2 souls and 2 sets of teeth, the second one barely visible, were believed to be Stryzgi. Somnambulics, or people without armpit hair, could also be seen as one. Furthermore, a newborn child with already developed teeth was also believed to be one. When a person was identified as a Stryzga, they were chased away from human dwelling places. During epidemics, people were getting buried alive, and those who managed to get out of their graves, often weak, ill, and with mutilated hands, were said to be Stryzgi by others. It is said that Stryzgi usually died at a young age, but according to belief, only one of their 2 souls would pass to the afterlife. The other soul was believed to cause the deceased Stryzga to come back to life and prey upon living beings. These undead creatures were believed to fly at night in a form of an owl and attack nighttime travelers and people who had wandered off into the woods at night, sucking out their blood and eating their insides. Stryzga were also believed to be satisfied with animal blood for a short period of time. Whatever version of the Stryzga is proven to be correct, it really isn't good either way. They're either personally coming to kill and suck your blood, or they're indicating that we're about to die. The way that you protect yourself is pretty similar to vampires. Burning the body of one of these creatures or putting a stake through it are proven methods of getting rid of them. Also, for some reason, slapping it across the face with your left hand is said to help. Not sure if I want to be the one trying that method though.
In at number 3 we have Beast of Bodmin Moor. The Beast of Bodmin Moor is another old urban legend from Britain. It's known that for 3 decades since 1978, a phantom black cat the size of a puma is seen stalking the moors of Cornwall. The Beast of Bodmin Moor has over 60 sightings of eyewitnesses reporting a black panther-like cat, being 3 to 5 feet long and featuring white eyes. Where there are reports of the beast, there was also a trail of mutilated livestock. The evidence was concrete enough that in 1995 the government ordered an official investigation into the existence of such a beast. The report finally concluded that there was no verifiable evidence of a big cat on Bodman Moor, although it was careful to state that there was no evidence against it either. Shortly after, the report didn't lead anywhere. A small boy found a leopard skull lying on the banks of the River Fowey, thus creating bigger speculation about the beast being real. Sightings continued, and in 1998 there was a video footage released that clearly shows a black cat looking animal that fits the description of the beast of Bodman Moor. More recently, in October 2016 near St. Austell, there was reported a giant set of paw prints. Some people have reported being chased by the powerful and scary cat-like creature. Others have spotted it in the distance, not quite believing their eyes. Some believe that the animal is a species of wild cat, though extinct in Britain many years ago, still surviving on the moors of Cornwall. Others blame the paranormal, believing the beast to be a mythical spirit of a creature that roamed Cornwall in the past. In at number 2 we have Owlman of Manon. A remote church in Cornwall is known to be the home of a half-man, half-owl creature that has been terrifying the locals and tourists since the 1920s. Known as the Owlman of Manon Smith, the creature is a human-sized owl with large wings, long claws, and glowing eyes. The first sighting of the Owlman was reported in April 1976, where 2 girls on vacation with their family walked down to the old church. When approaching the remote church, they saw what they described as a terrifying birdman with wings and feathers. The girls were so scared by their encounter with the Owlman that their parents decided to end their vacation early and leave Cornwall immediately. There was another sighting 2 years later. At first, the witnesses thought that someone was playing a trick on them, that it was a person dressed up in a costume. Like other reports, they described an abnormally large birdman, silver grey in colour with feathers. They only realised that it wasn't a trick when they saw the creature fly up into the air and disappear. After it flew away, they said that there was a strange static noise coming from the trees for some time afterwards. There was a further sighting in 1989 and then again 6 years later. The witness this time was an American tourist, and she described the Owlman as being around 5 foot tall with huge claws protruding from its vast wings. The most recent sighting was in September of 2009. It was reported that a young girl named Jessica Wilkins saw the Owlman of Manon for the first time this century. Though with all these sightings near the Manon church, the Owlman is still a mystery. Some theorize that the church is standing in the center of an ancient earthworks and has an earth energy line passing through the site. The theory suggests natural earth energy could be connected to the reports of the Owlman, but in any case the unsolved case of the Owlman is still a mystery. And finally, in at number 1 we have the Loch Ness Monster. Taking home in Scotland at Loch Ness River, this might be the most well-known urban legend in Britain. The famous legend of the Loch Ness Monster began to gain attraction in 1933. At the time, a road across the Loch Ness was finished, offering an unobstructed view of the lake. The first recorded sighting was in April of the same year, where a couple recalled seeing an enormous animal. They compared the creature that they witnessed to a dragon or prehistoric creature. After it crossed their car's path, it disappeared into the water. In December 1933, the Daily Mail commissioned Marmaduke Wetherall, a hunter, to locate the sea creature. Along the lake shores, he found large footprints that he believed belonged to a very powerful soft-footed animal about 20 feet long. In all reports, the appearance is generally noticed as the same. Common themes attributed to the monster include a large body with at least one hump, a long arched neck, a small head, and being grey or dark brown colour. The Loch Ness area attracted numerous monster hunters. Over the years, several sonar explorations were undertaken to locate the creature, but none were successful. In addition, numerous photographs allegedly showed the beast, but most were discredited as fake or as depicting other animals or objects. That being said, a satellite image on Apple Maps revealed what appeared to be a large creature around 30 meters long just below the surface of Loch Ness on April 19, 2014. This not only generated the usual hype of claims that it was the Loch Ness Monster, but also served to comfort those who were upset over the earlier speculation that Nessie had disappeared. And to this day, the creature photographed in this image is unidentified. Even though it's not confirmed, with all the reports and witnesses and the fact that most of the Loch Ness River is still unexplored, it's hard not to believe in the legend of Loch Ness Monster.
Kicking off at number 5, an ancient Greek haunting. And this tale is just straight up awesome and may in fact be one of the earliest known recordings of a ghost story in European history. And it's a tale told by the legendary Roman author and politician Pliny the Younger way back when in 72 AD. And it concerns a particular haunted house in the Greek capital of Athens. In the city there was a large attractive house that had remained a mystery to the local people as to when and where it had been built. ill and thus garnered a disturbing reputation. At night, anyone sleeping inside the building heard strange groans and creaks, and sometimes in the dead of night came the rattling of chains. Because of its reputation, it had changed hands through a string of owners. No one wanted to be afflicted by its paranormal goings on. So came a Greek philosopher named Athenodrus, a highly rational man that didn't believe in ghosts and could spot a bargain at the same time. Despite the warnings and the house's terrible reputation, he brought the house for a fraction of the price and moved on in. On his first night there, after an evening of drinking and reading, he of course began to hear the strange sounds of the restless spirit, and after a while Athenodrus looked up to see an emaciated old man peering straight at him with chains bound across his wrists, violent wounds across his body. Undeterred, Athenodrus realized that the ghost wanted him to follow him, and so he did. It led him to the house's garden, where suddenly it stopped and the chains shattered to the floor and dissolved in front of his very eyes. As the legend goes, the next morning Athenodrus ordered a few men to dig up the garden, and in exactly the same spot that the spirit had led him the previous night was the skeleton of a man, still with chains bound around his wrists. Athenodrus arranged for the skeleton to be buried in the conventional way, and from that day forth, the spirit was never seen again. Wow. That's one way to do it, right? Coming in next at number 4, the lady with the goat feet. And we're continuing this series with a tale from that mysterious place known only as Portugal. Now, the history of Portuguese culture is just straight up fascinating either way. The oldest state on the whole of the Iberian Peninsula, and perhaps one of the oldest in the whole of Europe, with a rich history of the Carthaginians, Romans, Celts and Moors. And because of that, Portuguese folklore history is ripe with a little bit of everything. As the legend goes for this one, first compiled in the Lendas e Narrativas by Alexandre Herculano, a Portuguese lord by the name of Don Diogo Lopes was hunting in his lands when he ran across the most beautiful lady that he had ever seen singing out in the field. Instantly he fell in love and promised her all the riches in the world if she married him. She accepted, but with one condition: he could never make the sign of the cross again. As Herculano goes on to portray, it was only when Don Diogo returned with his new bride that he realized there was something different about her. You see, she had forked feet in the fashion of a goat. Hooves. Not one to be deterred, Don Diogo shrugged his shoulders, and the pair lived in happiness for many, many years, where they had 2 beautiful children, Inigo Guerra and Dona Sol. One day though, after Don Diogo had returned from a successful hunt, he awarded his prize hound with a bone, but his wife's dog, a large black demonic looking hound, burst into a fit of jealous hunger and ripped apart Don Diogo's dog in a violent rage. Shocked by such incredible evil and gore, Don Diogo blessed himself with the sign of the cross, and in that moment his wife, the lady with the goat feet, let out a hypnotic screech, screamed and floated into the air. And then her young daughter, Dona Sol, did the same, and the 2 women were never seen again. Now obviously there is a lot of allegory of religious tones to this story in particular, but it does pose the interesting question, where the hell is this story's origin rooted?
Number 3 on this list is dragons. Now I know that dragons aren't technically demons, but they are pretty bloody terrifying in my opinion, and for that reason I think they deserve some love on this list. Italy has quite the history with dragons and has had some pretty big ones in the past. Dragon's Wish says one of the most famous dragons of Italian folklore is Tyrus, a wyvern that besieged Terni in the Middle Ages. One day, a young and brave knight of the noble house of Cittadini, tired of witnessing the death of his fellow citizens and depopulation of Terni, faced the dragon and killed him. The town, from that day onwards, adopted the dragon in its coat of arms, and accompanied by a Latin inscription, Tyrus e annis dederent signa terraminis, that stands under the banner of the town of Terni, honoring this legend. This is just the most famous legend of a dragon in Italy, but it doesn't mean that it's the only one. There have been other reports of dragons in Italy as well, and some of them have been very scary. At the end of the day, a dragon, in my opinion, is just as bad, if not worse, than a demon. If I had to go one-on-one versus a dragon or a demon, I might try my luck with the demon, guys, because there's no way I'm going to be able to survive the dragon. Number 2 on this list is the Lariosoro. This creature is an evil serpent living in one of Italy's big bodies of water, and it's said to be a servant of the devil. Yoaya writes, meet Lariosoro, Italy's own Loch Ness monster. According to Italian folklore, Lariosoro lives in Lake Como, which lies 30 miles to the north of Milan and is one of the deepest European lakes. In November 1946, 2 hunters claimed that they saw a huge animal resembling a reptile swimming in the lake. It had red scales and was about 12 meters in length. Upon firing their rifles, Italy's Nessie disappeared into the center of the lake with a hissing sound. The creature was named after Lariosauros balsami, a prehistoric reptile whose fossilized remains were discovered in the lake in 1830. More sightings followed at the lake. In 1954, a creature with a round muzzle and webbed paws was spotted by a father and his son. Then, in August 1957, another monster was allegedly seen by natives. A month later, in the same year, an animal was spotted in the lake, this time whose head resembled that of a crocodile. The last sighting was in 2003, and it looked more like a giant eel. It's got tons of different forms, and no one knows exactly what form it will show up as next. One thing is clear though, it's guarding whatever is at the bottom of this lake. Some people think that the devil has some type of gate there, or that he's working on creating a gate. Until the gate is fully functional and ready to bring creatures from hell to our world, the devil has employed the capabilities of this underwater beast to guard it. This is all just a theory, but no one knows for sure, so we should probably do some digging pretty soon, folks, and figure out what's going on underneath the water. And number 1 on this list is the Ferocious Beast. I wish I had a more descriptive name for you guys, but that is literally what it has been called. The Ferocious Beast. This is a demon creature that resembled a wolf and was around several hundred years ago. An enormous animal similar to a wolf, it ate pets and children and terrorized Milan during the 1790s, and the Milanese organized a hunt against it. After months, they killed the Ferocious Beast and displayed its body at the university at Pavia, but it's no longer there and has been missing for decades. Informal sources claim it was stolen, destroyed during World War II, or removed specifically by German actions during that war. So there are a lot of rumors that have circulated about what actually happened to this beast, but something that wasn't brought up there was that it still might be alive. Yes, it was killed back in the day, but now with this pelt mysteriously vanishing, people are thinking that this thing could have come back to life. Now this would have been with the help of the devil himself. The legend says that the devil realized how deadly this beast was to us humans. He saw some serious potential here and didn't want to let it go to waste. So he finally decided to come back and claim the pelt and then bring this thing back to life, but as a servant of the devil. Now its main goal is to serve as a demonic hellhound and claim as many bodies as it can before it's killed once again. Although killing it a second time is going to be a lot harder, considering now it has demonic abilities to go along with it.
Alright, kicking off the list at number 5, we have Banshee, the Irish Banshee. Scream like a banshee, there's a line you've probably heard in movies or songs, but what the hell is a banshee anyways? I've never been to a zoo and then seen a banshee before. It's not something I've done. It's actually a reference to the woman of the fairies. Irish folklore says that if you hear this woman scream, that means a family member is going to die. What a harsh and gruesome warning. The Irish Banshee is said to live in the forest, but she still is connected to you. Okay, so the scream, her scream, can be heard from very far away. So yeah, it's a warning, a terrifying warning that's pretty loud. You're not gonna miss it. It's said that each family has their own banshee, which is the interesting part. She has a different appearance for each family, so there's not one specific look for her. I mean, some accounts report her to be super tall and lanky, like moi, where other reports have been between, 1 to 4 feet. And the wardrobe, super fitting for the tale. She sometimes rocks the gray cloak over the green dress, and other times she goes out in all white with the red hair. She will warn you of a death by screaming. This is important. But most of the time, it's said that she only appears with the descendants of the pure Milesian stock of Ireland. So surnames that prefix with O and Mac. What about MC? Is that close enough? Like Mick, Mac, O? Am I cool? Am I good? Like in X-Men First Class, the movie, we see one of the main characters named Banshee, and their powers are screaming really loud. So even in our popular culture today, this legend has still managed to stay afloat. What about you guys? Does anybody out there have their own Banshee that they want to talk about or share stories? Is your last name dangerously close to it like mine, McWaters? Let us know down below. And before we continue with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please give us a spooky thumbs up because it helps us pay the bills for our electrical chairs in the basement here, you know? So thanks. Anyways, back to European folklore. Coming in at number 4, we have the Basilisk. Originating from Europe and North Africa, the Basilisk is a hybrid between a rooster and a lizard. How fun. It was born from an egg laid by a rooster and incubated by a toad. It's kind of like Jurassic Park, but you know, more fun, more terrifying, I don't know, depends. But it didn't always take that shape exactly. So early accounts of the basilisk say that it started off as a small crowned snake and would simply kill by using its poison and evil gaze. Of course, you can't forget the gaze. And it even leaves a trail of venom, as if that wasn't enough. So you know where not to go, rather. In Christian mythology, the basilisk represents hell, yet some places it represents power. Like it became the symbol of the Swiss city Basel. It's believed to be the most poisonous creature ever, and apparently once it was killed by a spear from somebody on a horse, and the venom was so strong that it flowed up through the spear and killed the man and the horse. Not the horse? Come on, guys. Even the herbs around it died because the air was tainted of poison. And if there's a well near it, that water becomes poisoned forever. I mean, there's nothing a little crystal light can't fix though, right? Sip water, you're like, no, this one's tainted for sure. And then it became known as this large hybrid creature with a loud roar.
Do the roar.
You know anything? How about one of those famous Shrek roars?
Do the roar.
And of course, it's known to breathe fire. Another common interpretation is that the basilisk from Harry Potter. So in Chamber of Secrets, we see Harry fight the basilisk, and it takes on the appearance of a very, very large snake. Greek mythology always has the coolest stuff. Damn. It also appeared in the 2016 film Gods of Egypt.
And how do you know they have a weak spot? I don't, but they must, right?
In a much less exciting cinematic way than Harry Potter, I'd say.
Next up at number 3, Bishop Thevina of Merseburg. And outside of everything else, this guy in particular was an incredibly interesting individual and an important chronicler of the ancient kings and holy Roman emperors of Europe. He was born of royalty but only ever as a prince, and so he made a life documenting the comings and goings of the kingdoms. Because of that, he also came across some pretty bizarre paranormal occurrences, and this one is perhaps his best. As Thevina was informed by his niece, the Abbess Brigadia, a priest had been given proceedings of an ancient church in Utrecht that had fallen into disrepair but had recently been renewed and consecrated by the local bishop. One day at dawn, the priest saw what he could only describe as dead people making offerings in the cemetery and the church, and could also hear them singing in the pulpits. Disturbed, he asked the bishop, a man named Baldric, what he should do, and much to his dismay, he was ordered to sleep throughout the night in the church so that he could wrestle it back from the dead. But on the following night, both he and his bedding were thrown out into the cold by a supernatural force. Obviously at this point he was terrified, and so he complained again to the bishop. Again though, after being blessed with saintly relics and sprinkled with holy water, he was continued with guarding his newly consecrated church and ordered not to leave until the dead had been put to rest. But after not sleeping a wink, wide-eyed in terror, just before dawn rolled back around again, suddenly the dead lifted up the priest's body, placed him before the church's altar, and burned his body to a fine ash. The bishop, after hearing the news and confused by the matter, ordered the whole town to penance with a 3-day fast so that he could aid the souls of the departed. In his final writings, Bishop Thevina stated in this case, "As the day to the living, so the night is conceded to the dead." Swinging in next at number 2, Aniceto. And this story is weirdly terrifying, if not one of the most unfortunate cases in European history that would perhaps put Henry VIII to shame. And it involves a German prince named Joachim II and his favourite hunting lodge, the Jagdschloss Grundelwald, the oldest preserved castle in Berlin. Now, Joachim loved hunting so much that he'd regularly throw 3-day-long festivals to celebrate the thrill of the hunt, and Grunwald soon became his go-to spot, where he'd hide away from the responsibilities of rulership. ship. In fact, he was so smitten by the place that he allowed his mistress, Anna Sido, to live there in secrecy, much to the dismay of his second wife, Hedwig, daughter of the Polish king Sigismund I. Now obviously things were a little bit awkward, but in an attempt to win her husband's favour, Hedwig decided to tag along with his thrill for hunting, and so Anna in this respect was often sent away to avoid any confrontation. But during one particular stay in the lodge in the year 1551, the rotten floor beneath Hedwig and Joachim collapsed and broke away. Joachim was incredibly lucky and landed between the beams without any injury, but his wife Hedwig wasn't so lucky and she plunged through the depths. She shattered her thigh on the rafters, and then, if that wasn't already enough misfortune, she impaled herself on a set of hanging antlers that were on display in the room below. Hunting. You see, Hedwig survived, but in horrific physical health. And what did Joachim do? Of course, he eschewed his wife's needs and headed back to Anasido so he could carry on the hunt. The thing is though, Joachim and Hedwig had a son, Johann, who grew up throughout this whole ordeal with a burning hatred for Anasido. Eventually, Joachim grew ill and passed away, but on his deathbed, he made his son Johann promise that he'd look after the one woman that he'd always loved. And no, not his mother Hedwig, but instead Anasido. As his father died, Johann promised that he would, but the next day he instead ordered his men to capture Anna, where he imprisoned her in the Spandau fortress of Germany, and by imprisonment I mean that Johann walled her in alive beneath a small staircase in the western wing of the castle, where she presumably starved to death and died, and now haunts the spot for all eternity. Yeah. And finally, coming in at our number one spot, the tale of the Hundprest. Now, as it's become apparent throughout this video, European history is rife with bizarre, terrifying and mysterious tales, but perhaps none of them are so clearly perfect to be a horror film than the tale of the Hundprest, as written in the 1198 record of English history from William of Newburgh, A History of English Affairs. As the tale goes, there was once a chaplain who wasn't exactly the holiest of men. He drank, he feasted, and he of course loved to hunt. Because of this, he earned the nickname the Hundprest, the dog priest. Eventually he died and was buried as a holy man in the monastery of Melrose, but it seemed that even death couldn't stop the Hundprest. On many nights his corpse would rise from its grave and wander the town, where one night it came across a woman that he'd had relations with when he was alive. Obviously the undead skeletal fiend was still smitten with her and made its way to her bedchambers. Obviously the Hundprest was chased back to its grave, but that didn't stop it, and the lady soon became plagued by the ghoul every single night. She was unable to deter the undead chaplain and had soon become quite the terrifying problem. Distraught, she enlisted the help of a young friar and a few other men to somehow put an end to the Hundprest. You see, that very night the friar camped out at the cemetery, and when midnight struck, the other men who'd accompanied him had given up, given the fact that it was a cold and damp evening. But as soon as they wandered off, the Hundprest had risen from its grave, set about to attack the friar in all its undead gore, ripping at the young man with his bones and claws. Somehow though, the young friar had a burst of courage and attacked the Hundprest with his axe, striking it hard deep into its body. And it worked, and the Hundprest fled back to its tomb, sealed back for the night. But the friar wasn't done with it just yet, and as dawn rose, him and his men opened the tomb of the Hundprest to find the exact spot where the friar had wounded him, seeping with a vile black sludge flowing with undead gore from the sepulchre. As William of Newburgh later noted, the men took one look at the Hundprest and burned the body to ash, where they scattered him to the winds. And that's from a history book, guys, from 1198. Kicking off at number 5, Vinland. And no, not the Scandinavian nation of Finland, although that awesome country has as much deeply seated history as the best of them. This story is about a much more different destination. You see, the Vikings were remarkable explorers, and the art of experiencing the unknown parts of the planet was perhaps one of the most important figures in Viking society. So then, it would make sense that the Vikings managed to make landfall in North America nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus was even born, right? In fact, it is widely considered that the legendary Viking explorer Leif Erikson led the first ever European voyage to touch North American soil. You see, by the year 985 AD, Greenland had been relatively settled by Leif's father, Eric the Red, who had been banished from Norway for committing manslaughter. Leif grew up with a thirst for exploration, and it was around 1000 AD that he turned his sights towards the mystery of the West. After crossing the rest of the Atlantic, he discovered what is now Canada, a rocky and barren land which could have been Baffin Island, but the Vikings dubbed it Helluland, Norwegian reason for stone slab land. Eventually, when they got further inland, they discovered a much more lush and bountiful region filled with salmon and wild grapes that they named Vinland, Wineland. They spent a winter or so here before returning home, telling everyone how awesome it was. Now, because of that, several parties tried to sail there and settle permanently, the most famous of which being a site at the northernmost tip of Newfoundland at L'Anse aux Meadows, where archaeologists have discovered numerous evidence of their settlement. You see, after all of this exploration, though, the Vikings hadn't paid much attention to the natives that had lived there for thousands of years already. First, Leif's brother Thorwald Eriksson was killed in a skirmish with a nearby native tribe, and then several years later, another group of Vikings were mercilessly killed in the Battle of Vinland in the year 1010. As an old legend goes, the final nail in the coffin for the Vikings' time in North America came when a small group of fishermen woke up in their coastal camp only to find that their leader had been beheaded in the night by the natives, his head skewered on a stake as a warning never to return. Swinging in at number 4, the death of Hedingus. Now, whilst there are many legendary Danish kings from history, the majority of them are renowned for their lives as bloodthirsty warriors and daring tacticians. Hedingus, though, this guy is far more renowned for his death, more so than anything else. Although, to give him credit, he was a pretty legendary warrior and leader either way. It's just that, well, you'll find out. From the off, Hedingus was thrust into a life of violent circumstance. His father, King Gram of Denmark, rocked up to the wedding of a Finnish princess, Signe, and her intended husband, Henry, King of Saxony. Obviously, it was love at first sight, as Gram killed Henry on the spot and then took Signe back to Denmark, where she eventually gave birth to their son, Hedingus. Obviously, Gram had quite a few enemies at this point and was quickly killed in turn, but Hedingus was smuggled out in secret to Sweden, where he was fostered by a giant, Wagnofthus, and his daughter, Harthgreppa. Now, this is where the story turns up a notch. You see, all Hedingus wanted to be was a warrior, but the giant Harthgreppa had other desires. Despite being his wet nurse, she eventually seduced him in his adolescence and became his lover. When he came of age, Hedingus decided to head back to Denmark, and the giantess, of course, came with him. On the way, they spent a night in a house whose inhabitants had just died, but as Harthgreppa was a sorceress, she cast a spell that caused one of the corpses to speak. Well, that corpse wasn't too happy and cursed them for eternity, telling them both how they would die. Not long afterward, Harthgreppa's death came true. She was torn to pieces by her fellow giants in a bloodthirsty frenzy. Hedingus went on in silence, though, and became the legendary king that he was worthy of being. His death he kept secret, seeking wisdom from his new patron, Odin. Eventually, after partaking in some mythical acts and winning countless wars until his old age, he brought his subjects to a forest to witness his new revelation. He claimed that only Odin knew his death, and then he hung himself in front of everyone.
And coming in at number 3, we have the Genginger. Making its origins in Norway and Denmark, there have been many different depictions of the Genginger, of course, always so many depictions. The most popular being that of a spirit or ghost of the recently deceased. Now, that just sounds like any ghost in general, right? But what makes the Genginger stand out is that its name translates to against or towards, and also a footwalker. So the name itself also implies to walking after death. People who committed suicide were usually the ones who came back as a Genginger. Or perhaps before they passed away, there was something else that they had to do in order to be at peace, so they went back to do that. Whatever the case may be, the Genginger usually needs assistance from somebody in the living world. Now that's where things get a bit spookier. See, in Scandinavian tradition, the Genginger isn't a malicious or evil entity, just a spirit that comes back to say, what's up, you know, how you guys doing? How's dinner? Are you still cooking? Nah, awesome, when it disappears. Whereas other traditions, it's like a violent thing. You know, you didn't want a loved one coming back in this form. It was malicious. Relatives actually went the extra mile to make sure that your grave was properly sealed to avoid this, or else you would get the dead man's pinch. Now, the dead man's pinch, no, it's not a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and it sounds pretty scary, but you don't want to be on the receiving end of the dead man's pinch. It happens when you're asleep, because when you wake up, your skin would be blue and sunken, you know? Usually being attacked in your sleep means that you shouldn't be resting near a certain area. So maybe you're too close to a graveyard or too close to like these mountains. I mean, just throw a sign up, that works too. You don't have to pinch or bite any of us. So this undead zombie vampire combo would also break into your homes to spread disease. How fun. 6 feet apart, guys, come on, read the thing. Wear masks, space out. The tradition of the Genginger traces back to the early Viking ages as well, believe it or not. They're present in many of the Icelandic sagas, such as the saga of Eric the Red, taking the form of a mortal creature, and then Grendir is also said to have slayed the Genginger with his sword. Cool, it's always fun. You slay one of those. And number 2, the Liko. Heading over to explore some Slavic folklore where the Liko is otherwise known as the embodiment of all evil and misfortune. Now, if that doesn't sound horrible enough, their appearance is sure to get you. She's described as being an old lady dressed in all black, but she has one eye that peers out. And it's haunting looking, very. It's also known as a male that resembles a goblin, so either way, they're both not that fun. My personal favorite tale of the Liko is that some said it's taller than trees, like it's a cyclops almost, which is great. So what's the point of the Liko? Why the late night strolls bestowing bad fortune? Well, the Liko, and I'll keep saying Liko because I can't read, the Liko is known to be the servant of death. So during pre-Christian times, villages would conduct these rituals during times of epidemic, and a female-like idol would be built to be used as kindle to ignite a sacrificial fire. They thought, hey, if we destroy a version of it in the fire, then the epidemic would be dispelled. Then, of course, later on, it was linked to bad luck and death. The Liko is said to stalk its victims by perching on a fence or in a tree, just watching you from afar. And in many fairy tales, it's said that the Liko would jump onto your back and have its hands on you so tightly that even if you flailed around, it wouldn't let go. And while it was biting your neck, people would try and run into a body of water, hoping that it would drown, or at least let go. I mean, come on. And that wasn't the case. This was often the cause of their untimely death. See, the Liko doesn't cause their victim to drown, but death is usually the result of the victim trying to get rid of it. So it makes it look like it's your fault in a way. There is a tale of a blacksmith who encountered the Liko and made a pretty wild deal. So as the Liko was preparing to eat the blacksmith, he offers to craft anything the creature wants. So, of course, she asks for another eye, a new eye. The blacksmith insisted that the Liko be strapped down during this, because if she moved while the eye was being hammered in, it just wouldn't work out, right? It would make it worse, if anything. So once she was strapped down, the blacksmith took a red hot poker and jabbed her other eye out. That's crazy. That's like some Bruce Willis stuff right there. The blacksmith escaped by pretending to be a sheep, so the Liko didn't notice him when all the sheep had left the shed. Gotta love those handy sheepskin coats laying around. And coming in at number 1, Fear Liath, the Big Gray Man, and no, I don't mean Gandalf. Also known as Fear Liath More, this one comes from Scottish mythology, and it's probably one that you've heard of in one way or another. It's known as a possible guardian of another dimension. Coming in at superhuman size, its dreadful presence can cause suicidal thoughts. The Big Grey Man of Ben Macdui is said to be a distant cousin or somehow related to Bigfoot. That's why they look so big and hairy and similar. As they share similar appearances, of course, the mountain Ben Macdui is home to this fantastic beast that you don't want to find. Many glimpses of the Fear Liath have been stated that it's blurry, kind of like how all the photo evidence we have of Bigfoot is blurry itself. Many believe the cameras simply just weren't good enough to capture a clear image, but the blurry feature is said to be part of its ghostly nature. See, it's this tall, sinister, blurry gray creature. Science argues the existence of the Fear Liath, saying that the appearances of the creature are simply an illusion caused by atmospheric conditions atop high mountains, where the shadows of somebody can be cast far away and look like this large giant phantom. So this ape creature has also been beloved to the missing link in our evolution. People think this is like the half man, half ape right in the middle thing. What do you guys think? The shadow of death itself, or just the shadow of Fred the mountain hiker? Which one? One of the common feelings you get when being in the presence of Fear Liath is dread and panic. Now, many believe that this happens when you're climbing a mountain and there's not enough oxygen getting to your brain. That plus the anxieties of being on a mountain thousands of feet in the air, your brain will play tricks on you. But some tales are too convincing. One of the earliest sightings took place back in 1890 by John Norman Collie, a respected scientist and explorer who was walking in cairngorms, and a heavy mist appeared as he arrived atop of Ben Macdui Mountain. This fog reduced his visibility, and he didn't talk about his experience for 35 years. That's a long time to keep a secret. That's wild. He heard footsteps behind him crunching that didn't match his own walking pace. And then he described this creature that he saw. It was large with broad shoulders, over 10 feet tall, with long waving arms. He also said it had an olive-like complexion, or rather covered in short brown hair. But in majority of these cases, the creature is only heard or sensed. So if you're thinking of grabbing a Polaroid and hitting the slopes, you won't be too lucky.